Hi, everyone. My name is Barbra Dillon. I am the editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press, and I'm honored to have a wonderfully talented group of creators and educators with me today to discuss the impact and universality of superhero stories as part of the Comic-Con at Home virtual panel series. For the larger part of the last century, the superhero genre has grown exponentially, creating impactful stories and characters that represent a larger demographic of the audience, while also offering universal themes and ideals for readers of all ages. We will discuss not only the educational import of superheroes, but also how they allow readers to process complex themes and topics in a more digestible manner. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists. First, we have Frederick Luis Aldama, who is the Distinguished University Professor at The Ohio State University and Eisner and Latino Book Award-winning author of LATINX Superheroes in Mainstream Comics. He has served as the author, co-author, and editor of over 30 books, and recently made his picture book debut in The Adventures of Chupacabra Charlie. Frederick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We also have Dr. Teresa Rojas, who is a writer, editor, artist, and professor of English at Modesto Junior College, where she teaches literature, creative writing, composition, and comparative media with a specialty in post-1945 comic studies and visual culture. Her chapter book of poetry and illustrations, Don't Ask Me, debuted in 2019. She is also the creator and editor-in-chief of Calacas, an art, literature, and comics anthology zine, and the founding director of the Latinx Comic Arts Festival. Teresa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Barbara.
Absolutely. We also have Sebastian Kadlecik, who is a screenwriter, actor, and comic book creator. He is best known for the Eisner-nominated series Kinsei, about a young Latina who gets superpowers at her quinceañera, and the epic action saga Penguins vs. Possums, about a secret interspecies war for dominion over the earth. Sebastian, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And certainly not least, we have Peter Murrieta, who is an award-winning writer and producer who has made an incredible career in TV with credits including The Wizards of Waverly Place, Greetings from Tucson, Hope and Faith, Level Up, One Day at a Time, and most recently, Mr. Iglesias. Peter's work is also incredibly noteworthy given his efforts to broaden the diversity of the entertainment industry by ensuring greater opportunities for Latinx creators both behind and in front of the camera. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, anything for you.
Thank you, sir. Well, first, I want the audience to learn about all of you as individuals and how you came to work in your chosen field. So what inspired you to become creators and or educators, and how did this path intersect with the sequential art medium? Sebastian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I've always been into comic books since I was a little kid, and I fell in love with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, which got everybody to just give me as many comic books as possible. And so I immediately fell in love with I didn't consider it the medium at the time, but I immediately fell in love with comic books. And at least at 4th grade, I started just drawing a ton of comics and creating my universe. And being a comic book creator or comic book artist was really the first thing that I can remember ever wanting to be. And I grew up in the sort of image age of comics, and they were also energetic and exciting, and I loved it, and I got a lot of positive feedback from my friends and teachers and whatnot, and so it just was something that really energized me. And along the way, I've had other creative endeavors, but once I came to Los Angeles, I met up with some friends that were also into comics, and it got me just sort of, it reignited the spark. And I actually got a table at Long Beach Comic-Con, and I was going to just have a portfolio, sell some artwork. And I invited a coworker of mine who I'd become fast friends with and asked if he wanted to share the table. And he was like, yeah, but I don't really have a portfolio or anything to sell. What do we do? And so we were like, let's make a comic book. Let's be on the other side of the table for once, you know. And my sort of published comic book career started there. We self-published it. It was the first issue of Penguins vs. Possums, and I just loved it. I loved every bit of working on it. I loved going to the convention and talking to people, and unlike so many other creative endeavors in LA, it's a pretty quick turnaround. Something will happen with it on your timeline, and I just found all that to be so rewarding. and satisfied this childhood dream that I had. And from that moment, I was hooked, and I just wanted to live in the comic book world. So I think comic books are such an amazing way of telling a story, and for so many reasons. And I just think that my love for it is just continues to grow.
And Peter, what about you?
I have always loved comics like Sebastian. I'm a little bit older than Sebastian. I think Barbara, you and I have talked before. I think my first comic book I remember buying was All-Star Comics number 59, which was like the return to comics for All-Star Comics after being gone for so many years. And I think I bought it. I was at the right age, and we've discussed this. There was a girl named Power Girl on the cover, and I was like, that seems interesting. And then when I got the book home and opened it up, there were so many cool things in there. Like an old Superman was something that I was excited to see, a guy with gray hair, and like the generational elements. And then probably foremost was the idea of underdogs, of like, you know, I'm this Mexican-American kid, you know, I'm half Mexican-American, half Irish, and I'm in a neighborhood where, you know, depending upon the time of day, I fit in a little bit more than over here. And so like characters with secrets and characters with powers to overcome stuff, it was just like a lock. And I think, you know, I also grew up at a time when representation wasn't at the forefront of anything. And there was a lot of work to be done. And I'm really happy that I was able to participate in some of that work. But I also will tell you, as old as I am, that there was something cool, a little bit cool about it back then, which was like, we would just claim people. Like we would just go like, that guy Wolverine, I think he's Mexican. I'm going to say he's Mexican, that guy. It seems like he's got a big beard, and like, all right, that's who he is. He's a short guy and he's powerful. And we would just say, that's a guy. And so I remember feeling like that with like Wildcat, Ted Grant. Like I know his last name was Grant, but I was like, I don't know. And so you just kind of pull these characters to yourself because you don't have anything else to look at. And I think that's kind of a special thing that that got us through that sort of desert time. And then, you know, I've always looked to them as storyboards for what I do in TV and movies. And I'm excited right now that I'm managing to work in animation the last 6 months and been able to do some pretty cool stuff. And I think by the time this comes out, the Speedy thing will be a thing, which is like, I'm going to be one of the people redoing Speedy for an adult audience. And I love seeing Frederick's documentary because I saw that video and I saw Speedy in it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's great.
And Teresa, what about you?
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been thinking about this question a lot and how you tell your sort of comics origin story, right? And I've come to realize that I haven't given enough credit to my mom for my young reading skills, because I have very clear memories of going to the drugstore, and I've mentioned this before, on 24th and Mission in San Francisco where I grew up, and the Rexall there and the spinner rack. These are very clear memories for me. Candy and comics, those were the things my mom would get for me. And she really encouraged me and let me read absolutely anything that I wanted. She was an adamant reader, and she let me read anything that I was able to read. And she would always buy me Casper, Richie Rich, and Archie. And Archie became a huge favorite of mine, even into adulthood. But I remember there was a gap, you know, at some point I wasn't reading comics, and then I sort of came back to them. I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley, and I remember there was a comic shop there that I don't remember the name of, but it was kind of this mysterious place because it wasn't like a kid's comic place. It was very much an adult comics place, and that's where I saw my first Love and Rockets. And it was such a revelation to me that there were these comic figures who were women, but also who had different kinds of bodies. And then I also remember seeing R. Crumb comics there, and I was like, oh, can't touch those. I can only imagine what's going to happen to me, you know, if I buy one of those. And I didn't really understand that these were all different kinds of stories that we could tell in comics. And it wasn't until fast forward to graduate school, I went to the Ohio State University. And in graduate school, I had an advisor there who presented me with Fun Home, Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, for a project that I was putting together. And I remember telling him, yeah, this is weird. I don't know about comics. But at the same time, he was one of those people who you always listen to, right? And that whole Fun Home thing. And then I was lucky enough to work with Frederick in grad school, eventually became my advisor there. And that just opened up this entire universe of fabulousness. I was studying narrative theory, and now I could actually study comics, you know, as part of my program of study. And so my job was reading comics, among other things. You know, what a great thing. And then that brought me back to Love and Rockets and discovering, like, here are these, you know, Latino brothers creating together, creating these characters who are aging, who have these, you know, beautiful bodies, who are wrestling, who are mechanics, doing all these cool things. And then eventually I get to the job that I have now as a professor. I can't even begin to say how lucky I am. I remember interviewing in Modesto and mentioning that I use comics in my classroom, and that I use them as a way to really dig into visual culture and textual culture and critical thinking about those things all at the same time. And I also got to study cognitive literary theory, and they were just like, whoa, snatch her up. So then I get this job, and never did I, you know, imagine that I would eventually wind up directing an entire festival, where another part of my job is to bring together creators, and so many LATINX creators, and really highlight the work of my people, so to speak. So it's just been all these different convergences that have brought me together. And as an artist and as a visual person, I just really love that I get to do this kind of work and discover all this new work, and then also create my own work.
Absolutely. Well said, Teresa. And Frederick, what about you?
So, well, like Peter, I'm Irish, Mexican, and then I'm also Guatemalan. But comics for me was a way to kind of insert myself into these in-between spaces, and to imagine myself in, you know, ways that were neither. They were like something completely different and liberating, and, you know, single mom raising us, all that stuff. But there's another part of that origin story that I keep forgetting about, which is that my buddy Miguel's uncle left him as a kind of, I don't know what it was, maybe some kind of like his legacy was a huge chest of comics. And I remember going over to Miguel's house, and we would just literally sit on the bed and just like, that was it, like hours. It's like kids with, you know, TikTok today, you know, it's like, but so I mentioned that because there's the comics as a space of bringing people together. And I think that's really important. Now I'm going to jump right way up to today. Latinx Superheroes was a kind of way for me to go back, both the documentary and the book. And that was really important to me because it was a systematic way for me to organize what had happened in the past with me, to go back and look and kind of tell that story, and then teach it like that, and then run the SoulCon Comics Expo, etc. So, okay.
It was wonderful, Frederick. Well, Peter, you actually transitioned us really well to the next question in referencing how superhero stories have really impacted you. And then Frederick, given your work on the Latinx superheroes in mainstream comics, it really is no doubt or indisputable that for the past few decades, superhero stories throughout all different entertainment mediums have really left an impact on all of us. And I'm curious for each of you, and Frederick, we'll start with you, but why do you feel that there is so much of a powerful message with superhero stories? And why do you think that these characters have resonated so strongly with us?
So there's two things here. One is, of course, the lack of representation, which, of course, all of us here, Peter's writings, all of our writing is kind of pushing against, and it's bringing our stories and the complexities of the LATINX experience, which is not simple. It's not one thing, to audiences in ways that unfix the way we've been fixed in stereotypes. So that's really important, and it's really an exciting moment for us with all the things that have been going on, from the new Ghost Rider through Miles Morales, right? All of that stuff that we are so excited about, Gabby Rivera's America, etc. There's the other side of it, which is superheroes are kind of going back to what Peter and I and the other panelists were talking about. There's something extraordinary about superheroes because it allows adults, teens, and children to step into a place, a subjectivity of infinite possibilities. And for those of us who have been otherwise, maybe it's economic, it's ethno-racial, etc., confined gender, sexuality to a straitjacket, superheroes, it's like putting the cape on and really flying to not just into the sky, but into the outer heliosphere.
And Teresa, what about you?
I think it's so interesting to hear this because for some reason I'm thinking a lot about my nieces and my nephew, who are 2, 5, and 7 right now, who have always been excited by superheroes from I don't know, I think they came out with capes or some such, but the 2-year-old will put on a little outfit, and call herself Wonder Woman or Supergirl or Superwoman. And the same with my nephew and my niece and then me, like we all get very excited about these different characters, and it's very much something that we share. I think superheroes and Hello Kitty are 2 things that I share with 5-year-olds for sure. And there's just something very connective about that and very universal. But I think another thing that comes to mind is this idea of risk and how superheroes allow us to explore ideas of risk in our lives and how we, risk different things and how there are different kinds of superheroes. It's not just about the costume, the mask, but everyday superheroes. What does it mean to be a superhero? I've seen a lot of art exhibits lately that are exploring these different kinds of ideas, and they have the typical superheroes, but then they have like farm workers. They have people who are essential workers right now as really modern sorts of superheroes who are risking their lives for the greater good.
And Peter, I know that you and I have talked extensively about the fact that given your initial love of superhero stories, you have really taken that into your work in television and extensively built that into your writing process and your character development process. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. I was thinking of 2 other quick points off of what was said here, but this feeds right into it, is this idea of identification and risk, and it all feels to me like it's about bravery, because I can just picture myself as a teenager and being afraid of something, and because I was reading comics, and it seems so silly to say it, but you just kind of have a moment where you're like, Mr. Fantastic would not shrink from this. And so it becomes a bolster for you, and I think that's the magical part. In the work, I found that when I was doing series, that it seemed like an amazing secret to other writers when I would start talking about, oh, we should, in this episode, remember that scene that was 5 episodes ago, where somebody said something about a plate? Like, we're going to talk about that plate in episode 9. And we're going to mention this guy that Selena's going to go out with next year in this episode of Wizards. And to me, it was nothing more than that whole childhood spent where you would see a panel, and then bottom of the panel, it would say like, oh, that was from Action Comics 484. That car was smashed up and Lois lost her driver's license. And so I just love the interconnectedness of that. And in the Marvel, of course, everyone knows how that was interconnected, but DC was doing it too. And so that really informed the way I want to tell stories, and also thinking about things in panels. Like, I didn't know I was thinking in storyboards at all until I started talking to directors on my first or second show, and they would show me what they were drawing. And I was like, no, I get it. I get what you're doing. So it really does imbue me with what I want to do when I'm developing characters and how I operate on the stage.
Yeah. And Sebastian, for you, very directly in creating the Kinsei series, you have created a new superhero for a new generation. Do you want to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the series and your experience in trying to introduce a new superhero to readers?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone here has kind of touched on what first started it. It is a lack of representation. I was finishing up Penguins versus Possums, and I was thinking about what the next project was going to be. And I knew that I wanted to do something that directly focused on my family's heritage and our culture and showed it in a positive light, because I felt like that was something that was definitely lacking. But I didn't know exactly what the whole concept was going to be. And around that same time, my wife and I found ourselves at numerous family quinceañeras. And as I sat through each one of them, I thought back to when I was 15 and how I wanted to disappear. And here was a moment where I just thought, this birthday girl is experiencing the entire spectrum of emotions and handling it, and all eyes are on her. And it really reminded me of superhero stories that I grew up with, where, you know, in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends or the X-Men, where in moments of heightened emotion, that was when their superpowers would manifest. And I thought, well, there's no more heightened moment than what's happening right here. What if on top of everything else that she's going through, this was the moment when she unexpectedly got superpowers? How like amazing and how terrifying and horrible would that be? And Kinsei is about coming of age. It's about transition. It's a very specific cultural event. So it all seemed to be coming together. And then maybe a couple weeks after that, much like Teresa's story, I was watching my nieces running around the living room dressed as superheroes. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I love superheroes. They love superheroes. We're going to bond over this, you know? And I was like, wow, here are these 2 young Latinas running around dressed as Supergirl and Batgirl. Superheroes are so universal. And I do believe that. But my next thought was, wow, but wouldn't it be awesome if they had a character that they could see themselves in, that they could see themselves reflected back, that they could see themselves as a hero, both in a mask and out of one. So when the mask comes off and the character goes home, that home life is something that they recognize. And that was the moment for me when it became really personal, and where I felt like, okay, this has gone from being like, oh, this is a cool idea, to this is something I feel compelled to do and I need to put out into the world. And I believe it was Peter that was talking about claiming people because there was a lack of representation. I mean, I've had people say, hey, I looked at Veronica from Archie and was like, she must be Latina. I've looked at, you know, Wonder Woman because she had dark hair and bronze skin. Oh, she must be Puerto Rican like me. Like people find a way, but this was something that I felt like if I can root it in the culture and really, this is like a love letter to Latinos, like, look, here's something, you know, and like I said, primarily to my nieces, where I felt like I wanted to do that. I wanted to give that. And I didn't know Peter at the time. Originally, I was like, oh, this would be a great TV show. And I was like, I know how to make a comic book though. So I reached out to amazing collaborators in Kid and Emma Steinkellner and Fanbase Press as publisher. And I'm so thankful for that. And you talked about challenges of introducing a new character. And I'd say, I feel really thankful because I had amazing collaborators. I had an amazing publisher. And so I felt very confident in that project as a whole, and really shouting as loud as I could about it, because I feel like one of the big challenges, particularly with indie comics, is you don't have the resources or the reach of Marvel and DC. You're not in every story. There's not a whole publicity department that's making sure everybody's eyes are on it. And even when you go to a convention, there's tables everywhere. Like, how do you kind of rise above the noise or just get somebody to notice it? And I think with everybody's passion behind it, and with amazing people like everybody on this panel that contributed to the hardcover and amplified and raised it, both in terms of quality and just raising awareness of it, I feel like that main hurdle of nobody knowing that we exist has really come down, you know. So I would say, in my personal experience, that's what I would identify as sort of the largest hurdle. But I'm so thankful for all the people involved that have helped get over that, or are continuing to help get over that.
Can I just add two quick things?
Absolutely.
One, Veronica is Latina now on CW, which is hilarious. And one, you know, and I could say, I wish they would really own that rather than just have it be casting. And I know Mark is the dad, but there's just a lot of bent parts where there's an Italian mafia part, and but it's there. And then the second thing is, I will still argue with you that Wonder Woman's Puerto Rican. I mean, it's an island, and she has to come to America to save it. Like, I get it. It's Puerto Rican. Like, there's no way around it in my mind.
Agreed. Well, Sebastian, you mentioned the Kinsei hardcover. Do you want to briefly mention what that is? And then what I'd love is, because as you mentioned, everyone on this panel has made such an incredible contribution to the hardcover, I'd love to hear from each of you your experience in what you contributed. So first, Sebastian, we'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so briefly, the hardcover, we had done the entire Kinsei story, 15 issues on Comixology, originally in English and in Spanish. And when we did the trade, we collected all of the English version, which has obviously Spanish and Spanglish sprinkled throughout, but the English version as a trade paperback. And it was always, we'd always get people asking, like, when's the Spanish version? When's the Spanish version? And it was something that was obviously on our hearts to do. And through the amazing work of Fanbase Press, it became a reality. So the hardcover is oversized. It's a little bit larger than the original version. It's got a hardcover, which is amazing. It stands the test of time. You can hand it off to people. It looks great in a library. And it's got a brand new cover. And it's got an amazing, the biggest thing is it's the definitive bilingual edition. So the entire story plus bonus features is on one side in English, and you flip it over and the entire story plus bonus features are in Spanish. And the bonus features are amazing. These amazing panelists have all contributed to it, so I'll hand it over, but I just want to talk about, there's an art gallery, there's a letter from me, there's then the amazing contributions of these three. So.
And Teresa, why don't we start with you? Do you want to speak about your study guide?
Absolutely. I was incredibly fortunate to be asked to do the study guide for the definitive bilingual edition. And that was just an amazing experience, because you can't do a study guide for just anything. You really have to have enough material. You have to be able to dive in. And my main concern when I was asked was, can I do something that I can create that for multiple levels, multiple age groups? Because that's really important to me as a scholar, that I create something that is accessible on multiple levels. And it was easy. It was very easy to do that. Wait, I shouldn't say it was easy. It was very difficult. It took me weeks. But in the end, I created a 4-page study guide that includes, some vocabulary, and includes thought questions, advanced thought questions, a little bit of background on the, what is a quinceañera? What does that mean? What is the cultural importance of that? And I love that now as a full hardcover volume. It's fabulous because I have been able to talk about it with my colleagues. I've been able to present it to folks who do different kinds of literature. For example, children's literature, which I'm teaching in the spring, I just found out. So Chupacabra Charlie, going to be taking a look at that one as well. But I have a colleague who teaches Spanish who's interested in adding that to per curriculum, and that you can flip the thing, and that you had someone translate, because I did the English version, I did not do the Spanish version, and the Spanish version is just lovely, so that you can flip the book and you have the same volume in Spanish translated beautifully, is just a phenomenal feat. So I'm very happy that I was able to be a part of that.
And we're so glad that you did. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
And Frederick, you did an amazing academic essay. Would you like to speak to that?
So that, going back to our kind of discussion about representation and the importance of kind of filling, we have to do the work of very often educating. And I'm really excited about the new Speedy. I can't wait for that, because, like that and like so much other cultural icons, very often the cultural content is absent completely. And so we do the work either through the revisions that we're bringing to the screen, more than just casting a Latina, of course, but actually kind of in an organic way, educating everybody that may or may not have been kind of along for the ride from the beginning. So my essay was really just like, hey, the quinceañera is it's not just this one thing that you might have seen or might have heard of in LA, because LA, is majority Latinx and, very, very Mexican Latinx. The quinceañera is in Columbus, Ohio. It's in Kansas City. It's everywhere. And guess what? Those collective gatherings aren't just about celebrating a kind of princess moment. It's about queer coming outs. It's about finally your daughter dancing with another young woman, and cutting cake, and people coming together, family, non-family members, meeting in these sort of ad hoc spaces, maybe a church, maybe not, maybe it's a school hall. But the most important thing is that there's celebration, there's coming together, and it's also it's a tradition that's evolving. So we need to be in step with that, with us Latinos and also the mainstream in general. So that was really what that was about.
Absolutely. And Peter, you wrote one of two beautiful forewords to the book alongside Gloria Calderon-Kellett. Do you want to speak to your inspiration for the foreword?
Sure. I mean, I think, I was attracted to the book, and I think as a TV writer, when we are lucky, and we need to be more lucky to get a show on that has Latin characters in it, oftentimes you are in your first season and someone will pitch, we've got to do a Kinsei episode. And so when I saw the book and read it, it was just so astounding to me. And then, of course, the Kinsei episode of Wizards is what won the Emmy, the first one. And so it just was a natural thing that I was like, I want to amplify this and help any way I can. And I think what Frederick is saying is right. And I would argue that one of the things, and I will just speak in the Mexican-American sphere, but I have a feeling it transcends, which is we are awesome at making do and evolving quickly with what you'll hand us. And so when I hear about the different quinceañeras and how they are all over the country now, you go yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, that's where, lowrider culture comes from. We don't have money to make a hot rod go fast. So we'll just go ahead and go slow, and we'll paint it really cool, and you'll watch that. And so I just think that's a really deep thing about our culture that is something that an executive that's not in our culture would not recognize unless you told them. It's not the tortilla warmer or the name or the casting. It's like a deep thing. And I think that book spoke volumes about that to me.
Yeah. And one of the incredible things that I think that you have each touched on is the need to educate everyone. And I think one of our last questions, and I wish we had so much more time to chat with all of you. But one of the most important things, especially for Teresa and Frederick, that I'd love to pose to you is the idea of using superheroes and superhero comics specifically in the classroom. And of course, I'm going to open it up to Peter and Sebastian as well. But what are your thoughts on how students are able to utilize superhero stories and characters, and how they're able to better identify with and process the things that they are going through? Frederick, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so it is amazing. And I know Teresa also has this experience, because the students, I'll just be honest, they are more used to the MCU than anything else, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe, that is their superhero kind of, that's what they eat. And so when we bring into the classroom, Kinsei, or we bring into the classroom La Borinqueña, or we bring into the classroom the Centurions or White Tiger, Miles Morales, right? They're blown away for a number of reasons. One, they're seeing like superheroes that are of color, they're Latino, they're LATINX, right? They're actually anchored in cultural sort of specificities. But they're not tied to them. They still soar. They're still amazing. And the other thing that I love to kind of, the light bulb, bring them to the light bulb moment with these superhero characters is that very often it's not the action that's spectacular. Very often it's that moment that Peter was talking about of just kind of making it happen together with whatever is on hand. It's that kind of rascuachismo stuff, right? Where you just kind of pull it all and make something. And I mention that because at one point I was obsessed with the idea that comics had to be like moving and action, action, action. Then I realized that actually the concept of the ethno-racial pause, which I talk about later, is more significant. The way comics actually ask us to slow down, ask us to see what's going on in the background of the action, ask us to see how Miles interacts with his Puerto Rican, Nuyorican mama and her mama, right, his grandmother. And those are the rich moments. They're also the moments where the students seem to be absolutely sucked in, and where they begin to kind of take in and understand the complexity of Latinx experience and identity.
And Teresa, what about you?
Yeah, this is fantastic, because it leads right into what I do, which I often, particularly in my composition classes, so in literature courses, I need to teach a certain set of, I get to choose the books, but I will end with a comic. But when I teach composition, so I teach writing, I can choose anything I want, and I do all comics. But I often start with within the MC universe, and that is with Ms. Marvel, and that gives us a fantastic launching point for the introduction to comic studies, because of course they know superheroes, right? And they know the tropes of superheroes, but then they're dealing with brown superhero, female superhero, Muslim superhero. So we get all these different levels for discussion, and there are things that they're familiar with, and it's G-rated, but we start to delve a lot deeper. That text gives us a chance to talk about microaggressions, to talk about teenage angst, to talk about culture, to talk about masks that we wear, our at-home mask. If you come from a family where certainly a lot of Latinos, we have the experience of the navigating language, right? And how you speak to your parents versus how you speak to your friends versus how you speak as a student and things like that. And they start to realize, like, holy crap, not only is there so much going on here, but this seemingly innocuous superhero story is actually dealing with so many different elements of our culture. and that they have permission to tell those stories. This is a big thing with the younger folks and even with older folks, but I know I see this in my students a lot, where they'll say things like, I didn't know we could talk about that. And of course, in my classroom, we can talk about anything we want. So we'll have a whole discussion about the politics of, bacon, because in the first few pages, there's the whole thing about, oh, I want to smell the bacon, but I can't eat the bacon, but I love bacon, And so we spend an entire class talking about the visuals of that. What are we seeing? And the textual, and then what does it mean? What are things in your own culture that the politics of food, right? And so I love using this superhero moment to then lead us into discussing our own stories and going back to this idea of risk and what Peter called, bravery. And how brave are you in terms of telling your own story and your own family stories, right? I couldn't tell my family stories until my mom passed 3 years ago now this month, because the stories I wanted to tell, that was, I had them written, but they're just coming out right now. So it gives us a chance to talk about that, to talk about what does it mean to have this model of a superhero as the blonde, scantily clad superhero versus what you're supposed to wear within, what's acceptable within Muslim culture, what's acceptable within Latino culture, what's acceptable within, whatever other cultures we have in the mixture of this class. So I love doing that. I love using that as a gateway. And if I'm teaching in the fall, when I'm teaching in the fall, I often have my students participate in the November, the 30-day drawing thing. I'm blanking, Inktober. Did I say November? I meant October. In Inktober, and they start drawing every day, and all of a sudden they're like, I didn't even know I could draw. I didn't even know I had anything to draw. They start with the prompts, and then they chuck the prompts by the end of the month, and they've got 30 drawings, and we talk about that, and that leads to a whole other world of narrative that they've given themselves permission to then discuss and put into the world and go on Instagram. And so I feel like it's very much this a very small gateway that leads to a much larger universe for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, sadly, again, I wish I could talk to you all for another hour, but we only have a minute or two left. So I think it's important for our viewers, if they want to find your work, if they want to find you on social media, what is the best way to do so? Peter, why don't we start with you?
My handle on almost everything is Mighty Peter. Mr. IGLESIAS second season's out on Netflix, and certainly could use the views. If you like Gabriel Iglesias, you like comedy, you like the superhero of a teacher trying to save his kids, check it out.
Absolutely. And Teresa?
Yeah, so my Instagram is doctero, spelled DOCTEEROH. That's a super easy way to get a hold of me. And I also have a website that's got a bunch of different stuff, and it's just my name, teresarojas.com. And the festival website, the festival website is LATINX Comic Arts Fest.com, and that's also the Instagram handle.
Wonderful. And Frederick?
Mine's also easy like Peter's. It's Professor Latinx, pretty much everywhere. So,
by the way, I ordered your book about an hour ago.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you also for support. I know you've been a big fan of Kinsei and also of us and our work. So thank you, Peter, for that.
Absolutely. Seconded. And Sebastian, what about you?
I would just direct you to kinseicomic.com or fanbasepress.com. You're welcome to find me on any of the social media. I'm the only person with my name in the world, I'm sure. That's it.
Wonderful. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to Peter, Sebastian, Teresa, and Frederick. You are all such talented and wonderful individuals, and you're doing such amazing work. So thank you. Thank you as well to Comic-Con International for allowing us to do this panel as part of Comic-Con at Home 2020. In these challenging times, we hope that everyone is doing well, social distancing, staying safe and healthy. But thank you for your time, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.